The sand was still warm with blood when they dragged the next victim into the arena. But this wasn't a gladiator, this was a pregnant woman, her crime nothing more than refusing to worship Roman gods. As 50,000 spectators roared with anticipation, wild beasts were released into the arena, and what happened next was so horrific that even hardened Roman historians refused to record the details. This was the reality of the Roman Colosseum, not the glorified battles we see in movies, but a systematic machine of death that consumed over 400,000 human lives in ways so cruel that the records were deliberately destroyed, hidden, or rewritten to protect Rome's legacy. But this wasn't how the Colosseum started. When Emperor Vespasian commissioned this architectural marvel in 72 AD, it was meant to be Rome's crown jewel, a symbol of imperial power and prosperity. The Flavian Amphitheater, as it was originally known, stood as the largest amphitheater in the world, capable of holding 80,000 spectators across its 4 stories. Its opening games lasted 100 days, featuring exotic animal hunts and gladiatorial contests that dazzled the Roman public. The structure itself was an engineering masterpiece, with underground tunnels, elevators, and trapdoors that could transform the arena floor into forests, lakes, or battlefields within minutes. Rome had created the ultimate entertainment venue, a place where citizens could witness the might of their empire and forget their daily struggles. How did this monument to Roman achievement transform into history's most efficient killing machine? What drove a civilization that gave us law, architecture, and philosophy to perfect the art of public torture and death? The answer lies not just in the arena's sand, but in secrets so dark that Roman authorities spent centuries ensuring they would never see the light of day. The truth about what really happened in the Colosseum, the deals made in darkness, the industrial scale of slaughter, the deliberate targeting of innocents for sport, has been carefully edited from our history books. The Colosseum stood at the heart of Rome, built on the site of Nero's artificial lake, a deliberate symbol of returning land to the people. But this gift came with a price written in blood. By the time of its construction, Rome controlled most of the known world, and with that control came endless supplies of prisoners, slaves, and conquered peoples. The empire needed to maintain order among its massive population, prevent rebellions, and satisfy the bloodlust of citizens who had grown accustomed to violence as entertainment. The arena became Rome's answer to all these needs, a place where justice, entertainment, and social control merged into spectacles of unprecedented cruelty. Little did those cheering crowds know that they were witnessing murders disguised as justice, executions choreographed as mythology, and tortures so elaborate they required teams of engineers to design. The Colosseum's own architects built secret chambers where prisoners were kept in conditions so horrible that death in the arena became a mercy. Special units of soldiers were trained not for war, but for maximizing suffering in the arena. Doctors were employed not to heal, but to ensure victims remained conscious through their ordeals. The worst was yet to come, for beneath the Colosseum's floor lay a network of suffering that would make even the horrors above seem merciful by comparison. What you're about to discover will forever change how you see Rome's most famous monument. The testimonies buried in private collections, the archaeological evidence hidden in museum basements, and the accounts deemed too disturbing for public consumption all point to a single truth. The Colosseum was not just an arena, but a carefully designed instrument of terror that perfected the art of human suffering. And the most shocking revelation? The deaths we know about, the gladiators, the criminals, the Christians, were just the public face of a much darker operation. Behind the scenes, in chambers historians were paid to forget, things happened that would make even Nero himself turn away in disgust. The Colosseum's origins trace back to one of Rome's darkest moments, the Great Fire of 64 AD that destroyed most of the city. Emperor Nero, already despised for his excesses, used the tragedy to build his golden palace, complete with an artificial lake where the Colosseum would later stand. When Nero fell from power and took his own life in 68 AD, Rome erupted into civil war. From this chaos emerged Vespasian, a military commander who understood that his survival depended on winning the people's loyalty. His masterstroke was to drain Nero's private lake and build a public amphitheater on the site, a symbolic act of returning stolen land to the Roman people. But Vespasian had darker motives. Fresh from crushing the Jewish revolt and destroying Jerusalem's temple, he needed somewhere to dispose of the 97,000 Jewish prisoners he'd brought back to Rome. The Colosseum's construction would serve a dual purpose, winning public support while quietly eliminating potential rebels. The first crack in the Colosseum's noble facade appeared during its construction. Of the 100,000 slaves who built it, mostly Jewish prisoners of war, over 20,000 died during the building process. But these weren't just construction accidents. Archaeological evidence suggests deliberate work-to-death policies, where slaves were given impossible quotas and denied food when they failed. Bodies were mixed into the concrete foundations, a practice Roman engineers claimed made the structure stronger. More disturbing were the test runs conducted before the official opening. Vespasian ordered secret gladiatorial contests using condemned prisoners to test sight lines and acoustic properties. These unlucky souls fought and died for an audience of architects and engineers, their deaths recorded only in measurements and architectural adjustments. One surviving account mentions 300 prisoners killed over 3 nights, their bodies dumped in the Tiber to keep the test secret. What allowed such cruelty to flourish before the Colosseum even opened? Rome had already normalized death as entertainment through centuries of gladiatorial games held in temporary wooden structures. But the Colosseum represented something new, a permanent, state-sponsored death factory operating on an industrial scale. The Roman legal system was restructured to feed the arena's endless appetite. Laws were rewritten to make more crimes punishable by damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Judges received quotas for arena sentences. A new class of merchants emerged, dealing in human flesh, capturing, transporting, and selling people specifically for arena deaths. The infrastructure of death was taking shape, funded by spoils from the Jewish war and blessed by priests who declared the games sacred to the gods. Most chillingly, a special Senate committee was formed to oversee arena procurement, a euphemism for ensuring a steady supply of victims. The first victims of the completed Colosseum weren't hardened criminals or enemy soldiers, they were actors. During the inaugural games in 80 AD, Emperor Titus ordered mythological reenactments with a horrific twist. Slaves and prisoners were forced to play characters who died in myths, but their deaths were real. A prisoner playing Orpheus was torn apart by bears. Another playing Icarus was given wings and pushed from the arena's highest point. One account describes a reenactment of Pasiphae's myth where a woman was actually killed by a bull in a scene too graphic for even Roman historians to fully describe. These weren't just executions, they were elaborate productions requiring scripts, costumes, and rehearsals where victims practiced their own deaths. The crowd loved these fatal charades, as they came to be known, cheering loudest when the deaths matched the myths perfectly. Of the estimated 5,000 people who died during the 100-day inaugural games, most weren't gladiators but ordinary people forced to die as entertainment. But this was only the beginning. What started as mythological reenactments soon evolved into something far worse. The success of the opening games proved to Rome's elite that the public's appetite for death was insatiable. Behind closed doors, in the private boxes of senators and merchants, conversations turned to profit. How could the arena generate more revenue? How could deaths be made more elaborate? How could the supply of victims be guaranteed? The answers to these questions would transform the Colosseum from a venue for occasional spectacles into a daily machine of death. Secret meetings between arena officials and slave traders established pricing for different types of victims. Architects were commissioned to design new killing mechanisms. Doctors were recruited to study how to prolong suffering. The stage was set for horrors that would surpass anything Rome had seen before. Beneath the Colosseum's arena floor lay a nightmare of mechanical ingenuity that historians call the hypogeum, but workers called it the realm of Dis, after the Roman god of the underworld. This 2-story underground complex contained 80 vertical shafts operated by slaves who worked massive capstans to lift cages, scenery, and victims into the arena above. But these weren't simple elevators. Roman engineers had perfected mechanisms of psychological torture, cages designed to compress gradually, forcing prisoners to watch their cellmates crushed before their own turn came. The Iron Maiden prototype chambers lined certain corridors, where victims were placed inside spiked containers that closed slowly over hours. Most horrific were the transformation chambers, mechanical devices that could stretch human bodies until they barely looked human, preparing them for mythological reenactments where they played monsters or demons. Slaves who operated these devices were selected from the deaf and mute, ensuring no screams or pleas would affect their work. The arena floor itself concealed Rome's most sadistic innovations. The cairns hooks, long poles with curved metal ends, weren't just for dragging away bodies as commonly believed. Living victims who played dead hoping to escape were stabbed repeatedly in non-vital areas until they moved, then tortured further for their deception. The sand wasn't just sand, it was mixed with chemicals that prevented blood from clotting, ensuring victims bled longer and more dramatically. Hidden beneath trapdoors were specialized torture devices, rotating wheels studded with blades, heated metal grates that could be raised to burn feet, and most terrifying of all, the tubes of Tartarus, narrow vertical pipes where victims were lowered headfirst and left to die from blood pooling in their brains. Roman engineers competed to create new mechanisms, with the winner receiving gold and their device being named after them. One such inventor, Carpophorus the Syrian, created 23 different killing devices, including spring-loaded spikes that would impale victims who stepped on specific arena stones. Why these specific methods? Roman torture masters understood that physical pain was only part of the equation, psychological destruction was equally important. Methods were chosen to match perceived crimes and twisted justice. Christians who preached about resurrection were burned alive, then their ashes mixed with pig fat and used to light the arena. Women accused of adultery faced specialized tortures involving heated metal instruments that scarred them in ways that marked their supposed crimes. But the most calculated cruelty was reserved for foreign enemies. Captured generals were forced to watch their soldiers die in increasingly horrible ways before facing their own fate. One Dacian commander watched 300 of his men fed to starved animals over 3 days before being slowly flayed alive while musicians played his homeland's funeral songs. The torture wasn't random, it was a carefully orchestrated message about Roman power, designed to terrify potential rebels across the empire. The most detailed account comes from a Greek physician named Hermogenes who was forced to serve as an arena doctor from 97 to 103 AD. His secret diary, discovered in 1923 in an Egyptian monastery, describes being ordered to keep victims conscious during their ordeals using stimulant drugs and revival techniques. He writes of a special unit called the Ministers of Pain, experts who studied anatomy to maximize suffering without causing quick death. One entry describes a Gallic chieftain who survived 4 hours of progressive dismemberment, kept alive by constant medical intervention. Another tells of pregnant women being subjected to specific tortures designed to kill their unborn children first, forcing them to experience that loss before their own deaths. Hermogenes also reveals the existence of practice sessions held at night, where torturers refined their techniques on slaves purchased specifically for training. He estimates that for every public torture scene in the arena, 5 practice victims died perfecting the method. But perhaps the most chilling revelation was the audience participation torture devices. Wealthy spectators could pay to operate certain mechanisms from their seats using rope and pulley systems. The audience wheels allowed crowds to collectively tighten racks or raise victims over fires. Special seating sections were equipped with voting tablets where spectators could choose which torture came next. During intermissions, privileged guests could visit the underground chambers to personally torment tomorrow's victims. Children of noble families were brought to educational viewings, where they learned anatomy by watching vivisections. The Colosseum wasn't just displaying torture, it was democratizing it, making every spectator complicit in the machinery of death. Archaeological evidence shows where patterns on audience participation devices indicating they were used thousands of times, each mark representing a civilian's hand on the implements of torture. Behind each device was a human being, someone's parent, child, or spouse who entered the arena not as a warrior but as an object for Rome's sadistic creativity. And while we've been taught that gladiators were the Colosseum's primary victims, the truth is far more disturbing. For every gladiator who died in combat, dozens of innocents perished in these elaborate tortures, their only crime being foreign birth, religious belief, or simply being in the wrong place when Rome needed bodies for its games. Her name was Perpetua, and she was 22 years old when they brought her to the Colosseum. A young mother from Carthage, she had been arrested for the crime of being Christian and refusing to sacrifice to Roman gods. Her diary, smuggled out by a sympathetic guard, provides the only first-person account we have from a Colosseum victim. She writes of nursing her infant son in the underground cells, surrounded by the screams of tomorrow's victims being prepared for their roles. The guards told her she could walk free if she simply dropped incense on the altar of Jupiter. She refused. They took her baby away. For 3 weeks, she listened to him crying somewhere in the prison complex, the guards taunting her that one word would reunite them. Still she refused. On the morning of her execution, they dressed her as Ceres, goddess of the harvest, complete with a crown of wheat, a mockery of her faith. But Perpetua's story holds a detail historians tried to bury. She wasn't alone. 23 other young mothers died with her that day, their children made to watch from a special viewing box, a psychological torture designed to break the Christian community. The diary continues with heartbreaking clarity. Perpetua describes being stripped, netted, and dragged into the arena where a mad heifer chosen specifically to mock their sex attacked them repeatedly. But the animal attacks were just the beginning. When the beasts failed to kill quickly enough, gladiators were sent in with specific instructions. Wound but don't kill, make it last. Perpetua writes of trying to guide the trembling gladiator's sword to her throat for a quick death, but being prevented by arena officials who wanted the spectacle to continue. She describes watching her servant Felicitas, who had given birth in prison just 3 days earlier, trying to crawl toward her child's cries from the stands while wounds from a leopard's claws left a trail of blood across the sand. The crowd, initially excited, gradually grew quiet as the young mothers called out their children's names while dying. Even hardened Romans found this too much, and several spectators later wrote of nightmares featuring the victims' voices. But the games continued. Perpetua's final entry, written in another's hand as she dictated while dying, contains a message to her infant son: remember that your mother loved truth more than life. The escape attempts revealed the depths of human desperation. Marcus, a Greek teacher enslaved for debt, spent 3 months secretly loosening stones in his cell using a spoon handle ground against the walls. He created a gap just large enough to squeeze through, planning to escape through the sewers that ran beneath the Colosseum. On the night before his scheduled execution, he made his attempt. He navigated the fetid tunnels for hours, following the flow toward the Tiber. But the Romans had anticipated such attempts. The sewers contained iron grates at regular intervals, and stationed behind them were guards known as the Watchers Below. They let escapees come close to freedom before revealing themselves. Marcus was dragged back and faced special punishment. His feet were cut off and cauterized. Then he was forced to crawl across the arena while wild dogs were released in waves. His attempted escape earned him 4 hours of agony instead of the quick death originally planned. Other documented attempts include a group of Germanic prisoners who strangled each other with their chains rather than face the arena, and a nobleman who swallowed pottery shards to bleed internally, hoping to die before his public execution. The final moments of victims reveal the human spirit pushed to its absolute limits. Lucius Vorenus, a Roman citizen condemned for murdering a senator who had raped his daughter, spent his last night carving a message into his cell wall with his fingernails: "I die for justice the law would not give." When they came for him, he walked to the arena with such dignity that the crowd fell silent. Sentenced to fight successive gladiators until death, he survived 7 opponents despite having no training, fighting with the fury of a father's rage. When he finally fell, the crowd demanded his life be spared, but the emperor, fearing the precedent of pardoning a senator's killer, gave the death signal. As the final blade descended, Vorenus shouted his daughter's name so loudly it echoed through the entire amphitheater. The gladiator who killed him later freed himself and became a Christian, claiming he was haunted by Vorenus's eyes. Another victim, a Jewish rebel named Samuel, used his execution platform to recite the names of every person from his village killed by Rome, 416 names spoken clearly while lions circled him. He finished the list just as they attacked, having ensured his people would be remembered. This was just one of many. Conservative estimates suggest 400,000 people died in the Colosseum over its 350 years of operation. That's more than 3 deaths every single day, year after year, century after century. Each victim had a name, a story, a family who mourned them. Mothers who would never hold their children again. Fathers who died trying to save their families. Children who watched their parents tortured to death and were then thrown to the beasts themselves. The Colosseum's drains, archaeologists discovered, were specially designed to handle the volume of human blood up to 5,000 liters on busy days. Beneath the arena, they found scratch marks on cell walls where thousands of hands had clawed in desperation, layers of fingernail marks creating macabre patterns that workers called the art of the condemned. Each scratch represented someone's final hours, their humanity reduced to animalistic panic, yet still human enough to hope that somehow, impossibly, they might claw their way to freedom. The numbers hidden in Vatican archives and private collections tell a story of systematic slaughter that dwarfs our sanitized understanding of the Colosseum. Official Roman records, when finally decoded in the 1960s, revealed that during peak periods, the arena consumed 150 to 200 human lives daily. To put this in perspective, that's equivalent to a modern passenger jet crashing every single day for centuries. The 400,000 deaths commonly cited only account for formal executions and gladiatorial contests. It ignores the shadow categories. Disposals, sick or injured slaves thrown to animals without ceremony. Training accidents, prisoners used for gladiator practice who were never meant to survive. Private events, wealthy Romans could rent the Colosseum for personal vengeance spectacles. When these hidden deaths are included, historians now estimate the true toll exceeds 1 million lives. The Colosseum killed more people than the atomic bombs dropped on Japan, spread across centuries of regulated, bureaucratized murder. The killing wasn't random, It was a precisely organized system rivaling modern industrial efficiency. The Department of Arena Logistics employed over 1,000 people dedicated solely to managing death. There were procurement officers who traveled the empire selecting victims, transportation coordinators who arranged prisoner caravans, scheduling clerks who planned execution timetables months in advance. A discovered ledger from 147 AD shows the cold bureaucracy: Tuesday 43 Christians, lions, 12 thieves, crucifixion, 28 war prisoners, gladiatorial, 67 miscellaneous, beasts. Required: 14 lions, 8 bears, 45 gladiators, 200 amphorae of sand. The infrastructure supporting this included holding facilities across the empire, each capable of housing thousands awaiting transport to Rome. Ships were specially modified with cage holds. A network of roads was maintained specifically for prisoner transport, with way stations every 20 miles where guards could rest and victims could be displayed to local populations as warnings. The categories of victims reveal Rome's systematic approach to terror. Political prisoners faced elaborate executions matching their alleged crimes. Conspirators were torn apart by horses moving in different directions, symbolizing the fracturing of Rome they supposedly planned. Religious minorities were targeted with particular creativity. Jews who refused to eat pork were force-fed pig blood until they drowned. Christians who preached resurrection were killed, revived through medical intervention, and killed again repeatedly. Foreign priests were burned using wood from their own sacred groves. Women faced gender-specific horrors. Records mention special Venus games, where women were subjected to sexual tortures before death. Children weren't spared, they were categorized by age for different fates. Infants were sometimes sewn inside animal carcasses and left to die. Children aged 5 to 12 were used in mythological reenactments as cupids or cherubs, shot with real arrows. Teenagers faced adult punishments but were made to wear children's clothes to emphasize their youth to the crowd. The elderly and disabled, considered useless to Rome, were often used as appetizers, quick kills to warm up the crowd before main events. The economics of death created an entire shadow city beneath Rome. The Colosseum required a daily supply of 3 to 5 tons of human flesh, creating a grotesque economy. Body merchants bid on lots of prisoners like livestock. Specialized traders dealt only in specific victim types: virgins for religious ceremonies, warriors for military reenactments, families to be killed together for maximum emotional impact. The trade spawned supporting industries. Chains and shackles were mass-produced in factories employing thousands. Special wagons were built for prisoner transport. Medical suppliers provided drugs to keep victims conscious or enhance their suffering. Costume makers created outfits for fatal charades. The sand alone was a massive operation, requiring daily replacement and treatment with chemicals to prevent disease from blood-soaked ground. Ships arrived weekly carrying exotic sand from Africa, valued for its absorption properties. The Roman economy was so intertwined with arena deaths that a temporary ban on games in 175 AD caused economic recession in 3 provinces dependent on the death trade. But who were the people behind this machine of torture? The answer challenges our perception of Roman society. It wasn't just emperors and sadistic guards, it was an entire civilization complicit in industrialized murder. Senators owned shares in prisoner transport companies. Respected merchants made fortunes selling victims. Priests blessed the games as religious ceremonies. Teachers brought students to executions as educational experiences. Mothers lifted children onto their shoulders for better views of the killing. The normalization was so complete that Romans developed a vocabulary of death, dozens of words describing different types of arena kills, the way Eskimos supposedly have multiple words for snow. They critiqued executions like wine, discussing the vintage of particular death spectacles. The Colosseum wasn't an aberration in Roman society, it was Roman society, distilled to its most honest form. At the center of the Colosseum's machinery of death stood Titus Pullo, the master of games from 81 to 96 AD, whose personal journals were discovered hidden in his family tomb in 1887. Unlike the emperors who ordered deaths from their royal boxes, Pullo was the architect of suffering, the man who transformed simple executions into elaborate spectacles of agony. His writings reveal a mind that approached torture with artistic dedication. "Death is easy," he wrote, "but to make death a teacher, to make it speak to thousands, to make it beautiful in its horror, this is the highest art." Pullo personally interviewed every victim, studying their fears, their loves, their breaking points. He designed personalized tortures that targeted psychological weaknesses. For a mother who feared for her children, He would arrange their deaths in ascending age order while she watched. For a proud warrior, he would orchestrate humiliations that destroyed dignity before destroying flesh. His innovation of the family packages, forcing relatives to choose who died first, earned him wealth beyond measure and a villa overlooking the arena where he could watch his creations unfold. The willing participants formed a brotherhood of atrocity that called themselves the Ministers of Mars. These weren't hardened criminals but ordinary Romans who discovered they enjoyed inflicting pain. The application process was rigorous. Candidates had to demonstrate creativity in torture methods and emotional detachment from victims' pleas. Training lasted 6 months in secret facilities where they practiced on slaves purchased specifically for education. Graduates received bronze rings marking them as licensed torturers, and their children received automatic Roman citizenship. One such minister, Gavius Maximus, kept detailed notes of his experiments in pain thresholds across different ethnicities. He developed charts measuring how long various populations could endure specific tortures, treating human suffering like agricultural data. His son would later follow in his footsteps, creating a dynasty of torturers that lasted 4 generations. These men attended dinner parties where they casually discussed dismemberment techniques between courses. Their wives compared notes on which screams indicated genuine versus performed agony. It was a profession that paid well. Senior torturers earned more than most senators. But the true bureaucrats of death were the clerks and administrators who never touched a victim but made the entire system possible. Lucius Scriptor ran the Department of Final Moments for 23 years, processing over 100,000 death warrants with the efficiency of a modern CEO. His office employed 200 scribes who maintained execution records, victim genealogies, and crowd reaction reports. They tracked which torture methods generated the most applause, which victim types drew the largest crowds, which times of day produced optimal acoustic conditions for screams. Scriptor pioneered the use of demographic analysis, noting that Egyptian prisoners drew larger crowds than Gauls, that young women's deaths generated more repeat attendance than men's, that family executions on holidays produced maximum revenue. He created execution seasons like modern TV programming, with sweeps periods featuring special events. His most chilling innovation was the victim lottery system, where condemned prisoners drew lots to determine not whether they'd die, but how creatively. This added gambling to the spectacle, with Romans betting on which torture method would be selected. Yet even within this system of horror, there were those who resisted. Marcus Aurelius's personal physician, Galen, secretly documented the medical atrocities he was forced to enable. His hidden writings describe being ordered to revive victims who had mercifully lost consciousness, to develop drugs that enhanced pain sensitivity, to keep dismembered prisoners alive for hours. He writes of one night when he was commanded to surgically attach a living prisoner to a dead bear for a mythological reenactment. Instead, he administered a poison that killed the victim instantly, claiming the procedure had failed. For this act of mercy, Galen himself was nearly thrown to the arena. Other quiet resistors included guards who loosened chains just enough to allow suicide, clerks who lost execution orders giving victims extra days with family, and even some gladiators who delivered swift, merciful deaths against orders. A secret network called the Brothers of Mercy operated within the Colosseum, identified by a small cross carved into their sandals. They risked their lives to smuggle poison to prisoners, to deliver final messages to families, to ensure children died before being forced to watch their parents torture. But what drove these people to such extremes? The answer lies in a combination of factors that created the perfect storm of human cruelty. Rome's culture of absolute power meant that showing mercy was seen as weakness. The religious framework that declared enemies of Rome as enemies of the gods provided moral justification. The economic incentives made cruelty profitable. But perhaps most disturbing was the gradual desensitization. Pullo's journals describe his first execution. He vomited and couldn't sleep for days. By his 1000th, he was experimenting with new methods during his lunch break. The human capacity to normalize horror, to transform atrocity into routine, reached its apex in the Colosseum. These weren't born monsters but made ones, shaped by a system that rewarded creativity in cruelty and punished compassion as weakness. The true horror wasn't that Rome produced such people, but that any society under the right conditions could produce them again. The Roman public didn't just tolerate the Colosseum's horrors, they demanded them with religious fervor. The games had become so embedded in Roman identity that politicians who suggested reducing them faced riots. When Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, tried to replace gladiatorial contests with athletic competitions in 177 AD, the the crowd burned down 2 neighborhoods in protest. The phrase "bread and circuses" only tells half the story. Romans saw arena deaths as sacred rituals that maintained cosmic order. Priests taught that each drop of blood spilled pleased Mars and protected Rome from catastrophe. Parents who kept children from attending games were accused of denying them religious education. The poet Juvenal wrote of mothers who brought infants to executions, believing the screams of the dying would frighten evil spirits away from their babies. This wasn't mere bloodlust, it was sanctified savagery wrapped in theological justification. When a plague struck Rome in 165 AD, religious authorities blamed it on insufficient arena deaths, leading to a month-long killing festival where 1,000 people died daily until the disease subsided. The bystander effect operated on a massive scale, creating a society where protesting arena deaths marked you as suspect. Neighbors reported those who looked away during executions. Refusing to applaud particularly creative tortures could result in accusations of sympathizing with enemies of Rome. The social pressure was so intense that even victims' families were expected to attend and cheer their loved ones' deaths to prove their loyalty. One account describes a father forced to smile and clap while his son was torn apart by lions, knowing that showing grief would condemn his other children to the same fate. The crowd policed itself with vicious efficiency. Spectators who showed mercy were pelted with stones, their names added to lists of potential subversives. Children learned to mimic bloodthirsty behavior before they could properly speak, raising their tiny thumbs up or down in imitation of adults deciding fates. Schools held field trips to executions where students were tested on their enthusiasm. Those who showed squeamishness were beaten and marked as weak, potentially unsuitable for Roman citizenship. The economics of suffering created a web of complicity that touched every corner of Roman society. The Colosseum generated approximately 15% of Rome's urban economy through direct and indirect means. Vendors sold food seasoned with herbs supposedly blessed by gladiator blood. Prostitutes worked the arches, advertising services themed around famous executions. Souvenir merchants offered small vials of arena sand mixed with victims' blood as protective amulets. Wealthy women paid fortune tellers to read omens in the death throes of prisoners. Artists sketched executions for later sale as household decorations. Even the bodies became commodities. Gladiator sweat was sold as an aphrodisiac, blood was used in medical treatments, and human fat from victims was processed into cosmetics for noble ladies. Legitimate businesses depended on the games. Innkeepers, wine merchants, cloth dealers all saw profits spike during major spectacles. When a merchant named Quintus suggested the money spent on games could build aqueducts instead, his business was boycotted into bankruptcy within months. The message was clear: questioning the games meant economic suicide. Religious leaders, politicians, and intellectuals didn't just enable the horror, they provided its philosophical framework. The Stoic philosopher Seneca, often praised for criticizing the game's excess, still argued they served a purpose in demonstrating the worthlessness of physical life compared to spiritual virtue. Priests developed elaborate theological justifications. Criminals were sacrifices to justice, foreigners were offerings to Mars, Christians were purifications of Roman spiritual space. The Senate passed laws making arena attendance a religious duty for citizens, with exemptions only for illness verified by state doctors. Intellectuals competed to write treatises on the moral benefits of watching public death, how it hardened Roman character, taught children about consequence, and demonstrated the state's power to protect order. The historian Tacitus, while privately disgusted, publicly wrote that the games were necessary medicine for the diseases of peace. Even Marcus Aurelius, who personally abhorred the games, continued them because his advisors convinced him that ending them would cause social collapse. The corruption went to the very top. Emperors who showed insufficient enthusiasm for spectacular kills faced assassination by their own guards. But every reign of terror must end, and by the late 4th century cracks were appearing in Rome's culture of death. The empire was fragmenting, resources were scarce, and a new religion was spreading that called the games an abomination. Christians who had once died in the arena now whispered in the emperor's ear. The crowds, glutted on centuries of escalating violence, were becoming harder to satisfy. What excited them now required such elaborate cruelty that even hardened Romans began to question the cost. Veterans returning from real wars spoke of how arena deaths had not prepared them for battle but had made them see enemies as entertainment rather than threats. The very spectacles meant to strengthen Rome had created a population addicted to watching death but incapable of facing it. Economic pressure mounted as maintaining exotic animals and elaborate torture devices consumed resources needed for actual defense. Most critically, Rome's enemies had learned to use the games against them. Captured Romans faced arena-style executions in enemy territories, their deaths mocking the entertainment they had created. The society that had perfected public death was about to face its own demise, brought low partly by the very cruelties it had celebrated. The first crack in the Colosseum's reign of terror came from an unlikely source, a gladiator named Telemachus who refused to kill. On January 1, 404 AD, during New Year games attended by Emperor Honorius himself, Telemachus entered the arena not as a fighter but as a Christian monk. As gladiators began their combat, he rushed between them, arms outstretched, shouting, "In the name of Christ, stop!" The crowd, initially confused, quickly turned furious. For 4 centuries they had never seen anyone dare interrupt the sacred games. The gladiators paused, unsure whether this was part of the show. Telemachus continued pleading, explaining that he had once been a gladiator himself, forced to kill 30 men before converting to Christianity. Now he had returned to end the killing. The crowd's rage exploded, they stormed the arena floor, stoning Telemachus to death with rocks torn from their own seats. But as his broken body was dragged away, something unprecedented happened. Several gladiators threw down their weapons and refused to continue. The games ended in chaos, and Emperor Honorius, shaken by witnessing a holy man murdered by his own citizens, issued a decree that would begin the end of gladiatorial combat. Heroes emerged from unexpected places as Rome's appetite for death finally met resistance. Quintus Aurelius, the Colosseum's own beastmaster for 20 years, underwent a dramatic transformation after being ordered to starve lions for a week before releasing them on Christian children. He had watched thousands die, but something about preparing animals specifically to maximize children's suffering broke him. Instead of starving the beasts, he secretly fed them drugged meat that made them docile. When released into the arena, the lions simply lay down, refusing to attack. The children stood untouched while 50,000 spectators watched in stunned silence. Aurelius was immediately arrested, but his act inspired others. Guards began accidentally, leaving cell doors unlocked. Arena physicians started declaring prisoners too ill to face execution. Ship captains transporting victims mysteriously lost their cargo during storms. A network of resistance formed among the very people who operated the machinery of death. They called themselves the Broken Chains, identified by filing a specific notch in their work tools. By 400 AD, this network had helped over 3,000 condemned prisoners escape, creating an underground railroad that smuggled them to Christian communities beyond Rome's borders. The system began to crumble from within as economic and military pressures mounted. The Western Roman Empire was hemorrhaging money defending its borders, yet still spending fortunes on elaborate executions. A single day of premium games cost as much as equipping 1,000 soldiers for a year. Pirates disrupted the exotic animal trade, making beasts prohibitively expensive. Several ships carrying rare tigers and elephants were captured, their cargo sold to Rome's enemies who used them against Roman forces. The irony wasn't lost on military commanders. Animals meant for entertainment were killing Roman soldiers while the empire couldn't afford proper armor. Internal documents from 402 AD show desperate attempts to maintain the game's facade, painting local dogs to look like exotic wolves, using the same prisoners for multiple deaths with fake blood, recycling gladiator corpses as fresh victims. The infrastructure was literally falling apart. The Colosseum's underground mechanisms, maintained by generations of skilled slaves, broke down as expertise was lost. Cage lifts jammed, trapping animals and victims together in ways that ruined carefully planned spectacles. The arena floor itself began collapsing into the tunnels below during a major festival, swallowing several senators' sons and creating a scandal that couldn't be covered up. The final push came from an alliance of Christians, reformed pagans, and pragmatic officials who recognized the games were destroying Rome from within. Bishop Ambrose of Milan threatened to excommunicate any Christian who attended the games, affecting nearly half of Rome's population by 400 AD. Former gladiators formed speaking groups, traveling the empire to describe the reality behind the spectacle. They showed their scars, named their dead friends, and humanized victims the crowd had seen as entertainment. Most powerfully, they revealed the secret deals and fixed matches, how crowd favorites were given drugged opponents, how dramatic comebacks were scripted, how the entire spectacle was as fake as it was fatal. Economic advisors presented stark numbers to the emperor. Rome could either continue the games or defend its borders, not both. Military leaders reported that arena-trained citizens made terrible soldiers, expecting war to follow arena rules with dramatic individual combat instead of disciplined group tactics. The Visigoths who would soon sack Rome reportedly laughed at Roman soldiers who fought like gladiators, more concerned with looking impressive than winning efficiently. But the end was only the beginning of another horror, the cover-up. As Christianity became Rome's official religion and the games ended, a systematic effort began to erase or sanitize the Colosseum's true history. Christian historians, embarrassed by their martyrs' graphic deaths, rewrote accounts to focus on spiritual triumph rather than physical suffering. Former arena officials destroyed records that might implicate prominent families in the trade of death. The Colosseum itself was declared a sacred site where Christian blood had sanctified the ground, its torture chambers sealed and its true purpose obscured. Tons of documents were burned in 410 AD during the Visigoth sack of Rome, conveniently destroying evidence of countless atrocities. What survived was carefully edited. Gladiatorial combat was portrayed as honorable warrior tradition while the industrial-scale murder of innocents was minimized or ignored. The Roman elite, reinventing themselves as Christian nobility, had every incentive to bury their families' involvement in centuries of institutionalized murder. The transformation was so complete that within a generation, Romans spoke of the Colosseum as if it had been primarily a sports venue where occasionally, regrettably, some Christians had died for their faith. When the Visigoths breached Rome's walls in 410 AD, they found the Colosseum still slick with blood from executions held just days before. Alaric, the Visigoth king, ordered his men to explore the arena's underground chambers, expecting to find treasure. Instead, they discovered horrors that made even these hardened warriors vomit. In the lower levels, they found hundreds of prisoners still alive, forgotten in the chaos of invasion, some who had been waiting months for their turn to die. Many had gone mad in the darkness, feeding on rats and deceased cellmates. The preparation chambers still contained victims halfway through torture procedures, abandoned by fleeing torturers. One survivor, a Gallic woman named Lucia, had been blinded and was scheduled to play a prophet in a mythological reenactment. She testified that she could hear other victims being prepared for weeks, the sounds of bones breaking, skin being flayed, voices gradually losing their humanity. The Visigoths, portrayed by Roman historians as barbarians, were so appalled they released all prisoners and used the Colosseum to stable horses, considering it too tainted for human use. The trials that followed, though limited and politically motivated, revealed the depth of complicity in Roman society. When Emperor Honorius established tribunals to investigate arena atrocities in 412 AD, primarily to confiscate property from pagan families, the testimonies exposed an infrastructure of horror beyond imagination. Clerks who kept execution records testified about quotas. Each district of Rome was required to provide a minimum number of victims monthly, leading to mass arrests on fabricated charges whenever numbers fell short. Doctors described being forced to develop new methods of keeping victims conscious, injecting stimulants directly into hearts, using electric eels to shock victims awake, creating chemical compounds that prevented the mercy of shock. One physician, seeking clemency, revealed the existence of underground laboratories where torture methods were tested on slaves before public implementation. He produced journals documenting over 1,000 experiments in maximizing pain while preventing death. The trials also exposed the child trade, a network that supplied thousands of children annually for specific types of executions. Parents sold unwanted infants to arena suppliers, who raised them in compounds, conditioning them for specific deaths from birth. The survivors who lived through the Colosseum's final years carried scars that went beyond the physical. Marcus Flavius, who survived 3 separate arena sentences through legal technicalities, established a commune for arena survivors in 415 AD. His writings describe the psychological aftermath: victims who couldn't sleep without hearing crowd roars, who flinched at any sound resembling chain rattles, who saw every shadow as a beast preparing to strike. Many survivors reported a condition they called arena dreams, vivid nightmares where they were back in the sand, but this time their families were in the crowd, cheering for their deaths. Children who had witnessed parent executions developed what modern psychology would recognize as severe PTSD: inability to form attachments, violent outbursts triggered by specific sounds or smells, and a fatalistic worldview that expected torture at any moment. The physical damage was equally severe. Survivors often had missing limbs, organ damage from torture devices, and chronic pain from poorly healed wounds. Women who survived the Venus Games were frequently unable to have children due to internal injuries. The Christian Church, while celebrating these people as martyrs, often didn't know how to handle their very real, very human trauma. But even as some sought justice and healing, others worked frantically to hide evidence of their involvement. The Great Burning of 418 AD, officially blamed on accident, destroyed the central archives containing detailed execution records dating back centuries. Witnesses reported seeing senators' servants carrying documents to the flames for 3 nights before the fire. Wealthy families hired scribes to create false genealogies, erasing ancestors who had profited from the death trade. The Flavian amphitheater was officially renamed the Colosseum, distancing it from the imperial family that built it. Statues of famous gladiators and arena officials were quietly removed or recarved to represent philosophers and saints. Most significantly, the underground chambers were systematically filled with rubble and concrete, sealing away torture devices, holding cells, and the physical evidence of countless deaths. Workers reported finding children's toys in cells, messages carved in dozens of languages, and human remains in numbers that suggested many victims were simply left to rot in forgotten corners. One foreman quit after finding a chamber filled with small skeletons, infants who had been walled in alive as sacrifices to ensure the arena's foundation remained strong. But the true legacy was yet to be revealed. The systematic erasure of the Colosseum's worst atrocities created a sanitized version of history that would persist for centuries. Christian writers, eager to claim moral superiority over pagan Rome, portrayed arena deaths as simple executions rather than elaborate tortures. They emphasized spiritual victory while minimizing physical suffering, creating martyrdom narratives that bore little resemblance to survivors' accounts. The Roman elite, now Christian, commissioned histories that portrayed the games as regrettable excesses of a primitive past rather than a highly organized system their own families had operated. By 450 AD, just 40 years after the games ended, official histories described the Colosseum as primarily a venue for gladiatorial contests where some criminals and Christians also died. The industrial scale of murder, the torture innovations, the child victims, the economic infrastructure of death, all were deliberately omitted. This revisionism was so successful that when medieval pilgrims visited the Colosseum, they believed it had been a temple where Christians were occasionally persecuted, not a factory designed to produce suffering for profit and entertainment. The Colosseum's true impact on Western civilization extends far beyond its physical ruins. The Roman system of spectacular public death created legal precedents that poisoned justice systems for millennia. Medieval inquisitions borrowed directly from arena torture manuals discovered in monastery libraries, documents that survived precisely because monks thought they were preserving classical knowledge. The Spanish Inquisition's torture chambers recreated Colosseum devices with religious modifications. The rack, the Iron Maiden, the Judas cradle, all evolved from Roman prototypes designed for arena spectacle. More insidiously, Rome normalized the concept that justice required public suffering, that law enforcement meant entertainment, that state power was demonstrated through elaborate cruelty. When medieval towns held public executions in market squares, when crowds gathered to watch burnings and hangings, they were unconsciously following patterns established in Roman arenas. The Colosseum didn't just kill hundreds of thousands, it taught the Western world that watching people die was acceptable civic behavior. The patterns repeat with horrifying consistency throughout history. The witch trials of the 16th and 17th centuries recreated arena dynamics, public spectacle, forced confessions, elaborate execution methods designed to maximize crowd engagement. The Salem witch trials featured swimming tests, directly adapted from Colosseum water tortures. During the French Revolution's terror, the Place de la Révolution became Paris's Colosseum, with daily executions drawing vendors, prostitutes, and families who brought lunches to watch the guillotine. The crowd dynamics were identical, cheering for death, rating executioners' performances, demanding more victims when the spectacle slowed. The American South's lynching postcards of the early 20th century showed smiling families posing with torture victims, recreating the Roman tradition of commemorating spectacular deaths. Nazi Germany's public humiliation and execution of enemies followed templates established 2,000 years earlier: the dehumanization through spectacle, the bureaucratization of murder, the transformation of citizens into willing audiences for atrocity. Each society believed itself civilized while recreating Rome's essential barbarity. Modern archaeological technology has revealed truths that rewrite our understanding of the Colosseum. Ground-penetrating radar used in 2018 discovered previously unknown chambers beneath the arena floor, filled with human remains showing evidence of medical experimentation. DNA analysis of bones found in drain systems indicates victims from across the known world: sub-Saharan Africans, Northern Europeans, East Asians, proving Rome's death machine had global reach. Chemical analysis of arena sand revealed consistent traces of mercury and lead, suggesting victims were poisoned to create specific visual effects during death. Most disturbing, researchers found evidence of prenatal remains in dedicated disposal areas, confirming accounts of pregnant women being specifically targeted for certain spectacles. Forensic examination of gladiator graveyards previously thought to contain only professional fighters revealed that 60% of bodies were untrained civilians forced into combat. Children as young as 6 were found with defensive wounds indicating they died fighting. Advanced imaging of surviving victim bones shows torture patterns that match no known historical descriptions, suggesting entire categories of cruelty were successfully erased from the record. The warning signs are visible in our modern world, though we prefer not to see them. Social media has created new arenas where public humiliation and destruction of individuals provides mass entertainment. Reality television's gladiatorial dynamics, watching people suffer for amusement, directly descends from Roman precedent. The transformation of justice into spectacle continues in televised trials, public shamings, and viral videos of violence. We've sanitized the blood but retained the structure, audiences voting people into elimination, careers destroyed for crowd pleasure, vulnerable individuals sacrificed for entertainment. More directly, the industrialization of death continues in hidden forms. Factory farms recreate Colosseum efficiency in animal suffering. Private military contractors operate modern torture facilities with scientific precision. Detention centers process human beings with bureaucratic detachment that would be familiar to any Roman arena clerk. The technology changes but the patterns remain: spectacular cruelty, public complicity, historical amnesia. What this teaches us about human nature is perhaps the Colosseum's darkest legacy. The Romans weren't uniquely cruel, they were humans given permission to express cruelty within social sanction. Every psychological study since Milgram and Stanford confirms what the Colosseum proved. Ordinary people will commit atrocities when authority legitimizes them and peers participate. The thousands who operated the Roman death machine went home to families, celebrated religious holidays, created art and poetry. They weren't monsters but humans who compartmentalized monstrosity. The crowds who cheered weren't sadists but citizens who accepted suffering as entertainment because their society normalized it. This is the Colosseum's true horror, not that Rome was exceptional but that it wasn't. Given the right conditions, any society can transform into a death cult. The infrastructure already exists in our capacity for othering, our submission to authority, our ability to distance ourselves from suffering we don't directly experience. The Colosseum still stands, cleaned and sanitized, visited by millions who photograph themselves where millions died. Tour guides speak of gladiators and emperors but not of pregnant women fed to beasts or children tortured for mythology. The gift shops sell plastic swords but not survivor testimonies. We've transformed history's greatest monument to human cruelty into a tourist attraction, completing the erasure Rome's elite began 1,600 years ago. But beneath the restored arches and swept stones, the blood remains. In the deepest chambers, still sealed, lie evidence of atrocities we've collectively agreed to forget. The true Colosseum, the machinery of normalized horror, the society-wide complicity in spectacular cruelty, the transformation of suffering into entertainment, never really ended. It simply evolved, adapted, and learned to hide better. The crowds still gather, the victims still suffer, the powerful still profit. We just don't call them games anymore. In 1983, a construction crew renovating a Roman basement struck a sealed chamber that would rewrite Colosseum history. Behind a wall marked with Christian symbols lay the private archive of Gaius Lucianus, senior administrator of arena operations from 287 to 312 AD. His 400 scrolls, preserved by the chamber's unique conditions, contain the unfiltered truth about the Colosseum's final decades, records that were supposed to be destroyed when Christianity became Rome's official religion. Lucianus wrote with the detailed precision of a bureaucrat documenting his life's work, never imagining his words would survive. His first scroll begins, "I write this in my 67th year, having sent 23,847 souls to their deaths in the arena. I sleep peacefully. The gods are pleased with our efficiency." What follows is a meticulous catalog of atrocities that official histories claimed never happened, including detailed financial records proving that early Christian leaders profited from arena deaths even while publicly condemning them. The most damning revelations concerned the special programs, arena events so horrific they were conducted in secret, attended only by Rome's ultra-elite. Lucianus describes midnight gatherings where senators paid astronomical sums to witness tortures deemed too extreme for public consumption. One entry from 295 AD details the Phoenix program. Victims were burned alive, resuscitated by physicians, then burned again repeatedly until their bodies could no longer be revived. Another describes the Metamorphosis series, where pregnant women were subjected to surgical procedures that, the details are too disturbing even for historical record. These private shows generated more revenue than a month of public games, funding political campaigns and building projects that historians previously couldn't explain. Lucianus notes that attendees included judges, priests, and philosophers whose public writings preached mercy and justice. He names Marcus Aurelius's grandson as a regular customer who particularly enjoyed watching children fight starved dogs with their bare hands. The archive revealed the existence of an entire shadow structure operating beneath the official Colosseum administration. The Department of Innovation employed Greek scientists and Egyptian physicians to develop new methods of prolonging death. They maintained laboratories in the Colosseum's lowest levels where they tested pain thresholds, studied how different organs failed under stress, and experimented with drugs that prevented victims from losing consciousness. One scientist, Ptolemy of Alexandria, created a device that could keep a severed head aware for several minutes, a technique used in special decapitation shows where victims' heads were made to watch their own bodies die. The department also pioneered psychological tortures that left no physical marks. They discovered that forcing victims to choose between their children's deaths created a trauma that manifested in physical paralysis. They used this knowledge to create statue shows, where paralyzed parents were positioned as living sculptures while their children were hunted around them. Lucianus's financial records exposed an economy of death extending far beyond Rome. He documents trade agreements with kingdoms across Europe, Africa, and Asia for human trafficking, specifically for arena use. The going rate for a healthy male slave was 50 denarii, but exotic victims commanded premium prices. Virgin priestesses from Germania sold for 500 denarii, Buddhist monks from India for 1,000. There was a futures market in victims, where investors could buy shares in upcoming captures. Merchant guilds specialized in transporting human cargo, developing ships with specialized holds that could pack 300 people in spaces designed for 50. The mortality rate during transport was factored into prices. Dealers calculated that 40% losses were acceptable for maximum profit. Most disturbing were the breeding programs. Certain physiques and ethnicities were popular with crowds, so camps in North Africa and Syria bred slaves specifically for arena death, selecting for traits that would make their suffering more visually dramatic. But perhaps the most significant discovery in Lucianus's archive was the Book of Denials, a comprehensive list of atrocities that Christian authorities ordered erased from history after 313 AD. The book names specific events, dates, and death tolls that were systematically removed from records. The Children's Crusade of 287 AD, where 3,000 orphans were killed in a single day to celebrate the emperor's birthday. The Virgin Sacrifices of 299 AD, where young women from noble families who converted to Christianity were publicly tortured in ways that specifically mocked their faith. The Merchant's Revenge of 303 AD, where a wealthy trader paid to have his business rival's entire family's 847 people killed over a week-long festival. These events, witnessed by thousands, were completely absent from official histories. The book also lists 45 Christian leaders who secretly attended arena events after publicly condemning them, including 3 who would later be sainted. Lucianus notes with bureaucratic satisfaction that he maintained duplicate records of their attendance, hidden in locations across Rome, as insurance against future hypocrisy. Beneath Rome's marble temples and golden palaces thrived a parallel economy built entirely on human suffering. The Colosseum wasn't just an arena, it was the center of an industrial complex that employed over 50,000 people across the empire in the business of death. Marcus Quintus ran the largest victim supply company in Rome from 198 to 234 AD, and his business records, discovered in a Syrian warehouse in 2007, reveal the shocking scope of this economy. His company, officially registered as Quintus Exotic Imports, maintained a fleet of 23 ships, 200 wagons, and employed 3,000 guards, drivers, and administrators. They operated collection centers in 14 provinces where local authorities deposited condemned prisoners. Quintus's innovation was treating humans like any other commodity, standardized pricing, quality grades, delivery guarantees. His premium service promised delivery of specific victim types within 30 days anywhere in the empire. Business correspondence shows orders like 12 Germanic warriors, blonde, over 6 feet, arrive by calends of Maius, payment on delivery. The financial instruments developed for the death trade would seem familiar to modern Wall Street. Arena futures allowed investors to bet on upcoming games' attendance and revenue. Derivative contracts were sold on specific gladiators' survival odds. Insurance policies covered the risk of Christians refusing to fight, beasts becoming sick, or crowds demanding mercy. The Colosseum operated its own bank, lending money against future ticket sales and managing accounts for everyone from beast catchers to body disposal crews. A discovered ledger from 245 AD shows the arena generating daily revenues equivalent to 2.5 million modern dollars. But the real money was in ancillary services. The Sharon Corporation held exclusive rights to dispose of arena corpses, selling bodies to medical schools, processing human fat into lamp oil, and grinding bones for fertilizer. They employed 400 workers who could clear 200 bodies from the arena in under an hour, sorting them by potential value, gladiators to fans wanting relics, criminals to anatomy theaters, unknowns to mass graves or rendering plants. The corruption extended into every corner of Roman society through arena-related bribes and kickbacks. Judges received monthly payments based on how many arena-worthy sentences they delivered. A rate card from 267 AD shows the going bribes: 50 denarii for condemning a thief to beasts, 100 for finding Christians guilty of treason, 500 for sentencing entire families together. Guards at city gates received bonuses for identifying potential victims among travelers, foreigners without proper documentation, runaway slaves, anyone who couldn't afford protection payments. Even gravediggers participated, selling information about Christian burial sites that led to mass arrests. The money flowed upward through layers of bureaucracy, with each official taking their cut. Tax records indicate that arena-related graft contributed approximately 20% of senatorial wealth. Several prominent Roman families owed their entire fortunes to ancestors who pioneered victim trading routes or held arena monopolies. The industry spawned technological innovations that seem impossibly modern. The victim registry, maintained in the Colosseum's administrative complex, used a tag system to track 100,000 potential victims across the empire. Each person arrested for potential arena use received a lead tablet with unique symbols indicating their origin, crime, physical condition, and scheduled execution date. Runners carried updates between cities, maintaining real-time inventory of available victims. This allowed arena managers to plan shows months in advance, knowing exactly what human resources they could access. The registry also tracked family connections, ensuring relatives could be arrested if more victims were needed for group executions. Chemical innovations included drugs that enhanced crowd-pleasing behaviors, stimulants that made victims fight harder, hallucinogens that caused religious ecstatics to appear possessed, paralytic agents that created living statues. A poison master named Locusta developed 47 different compounds for arena use, each creating specific visual effects as victims died. The black market thrived alongside official channels. Desperate families paid enormous sums to smugglers who claimed they could rescue condemned relatives from arena holding cells. Most took the money and disappeared, but a few operated genuine escape networks. The going rate for a Colosseum escape was 10,000 denarii, more than a soldier earned in a lifetime. Forgers created false death certificates for victims who supposedly died in their cells, allowing them to be smuggled out in corpse carts. Guards could be bribed to leave doors unlocked, but the risk was extreme. Discovery meant the guard took the escaped prisoner's place in the arena. More grotesque was the market in virgin blood. Amphitheater workers sold vials claiming to contain blood from virgin martyrs, believed to cure diseases and ensure fertility. Testing of residue in recovered vials shows most contained pig blood mixed with wine, though some held human blood likely harvested from multiple victims. The trade was so profitable that workers fought over rights to collect blood from specific execution areas. Even more disturbing was the prenatal market. Pregnant women were kept alive specifically to harvest their unborn children for medical experiments and religious rituals. This sub-economy operated from hidden facilities beneath the Colosseum, areas so secret they were walled off rather than destroyed when the games ended. Dr. Septimus Galerius served as the Colosseum's chief physician from 275 to 295 AD, and his medical journals, hidden in the walls of his villa and discovered during renovations in 1991, reveal a systematic program of human experimentation that would make Nazi doctors seem amateur. Galerius wasn't a sadist, he was worse, a scientist who saw arena victims as research opportunities. His journals begin with clinical detachment. The arena provides unlimited subjects for advancing medical knowledge. Where else could one study the progression of death in such variety and quantity? He documented over 3,000 experiments performed on condemned prisoners before, during, and after their arena appearances. His research focused on pain thresholds across different populations, organ failure sequences during various trauma types, and methods of maintaining consciousness during fatal injuries. He developed charts showing exactly how long a person could survive with specific wounds, which organs could be removed while maintaining awareness, and what combinations of injuries produced the most prolonged deaths. The experiments grew progressively darker as Galerius gained imperial support for his research. Emperor Aurelian, fascinated by the possibility of creating stronger soldiers, funded a secret medical facility beneath the Colosseum where Galerius conducted experiments too extreme for even arena spectacles. He attempted limb transplants between living subjects, tested the limits of blood loss, and explored how much of the human body could be removed while maintaining life. One series of experiments involved pregnant women. He wanted to understand fetal response to maternal trauma. His notes describe inducing labor through torture, studying how long newborns could survive without air, and attempting to surgically relocate pregnancies between women. Another project involved creating composite gladiators by surgically joining parts from multiple fighters. Most died within hours, but some survived long enough to be displayed in special exhibitions for selected elite viewers. Galerius expressed frustration that subjects kept dying before he could complete his procedures, leading him to develop new preservation techniques using snow from the Alps and chemical solutions that slowed decay. His most ambitious project was the Immortality Protocol, an attempt to discover the secret of preserving life indefinitely. Inspired by Egyptian mummification, Galerius experimented with replacing blood with various substances while subjects remained conscious. He tried honey, wine, mercury, and finally a solution of his own design containing herbs and minerals. Subjects were gradually drained and refilled over days, their reactions meticulously documented. He achieved his greatest success, with a young Greek philosopher who survived 17 days with mercury-based solution in his veins, remaining conscious and able to speak until the final hours. Galerius recorded every word, noting how the man's personality changed as the foreign substance affected his brain. The philosopher reportedly begged for death by day 3 but was kept alive to observe the full progression. Other experiments involved exposing subjects to extreme temperatures, pressures, and environments to test human adaptability. Victims were slowly frozen, boiled, compressed in specially designed chambers, and subjected to controlled drowning and revival cycles. The research extended beyond individual experiments to population studies. Galerius used the arena's diverse victim pool to study racial and ethnic differences in pain tolerance, disease resistance, and death patterns. He maintained detailed genealogies of victim families, tracking inherited traits across generations of arena deaths. His conclusions, based on torturing thousands, formed the basis for Roman military training manuals and interrogation techniques used across the empire. He discovered that emotional torture often produced more useful results than physical pain, forcing parents to watch their children suffer generated stress responses that physical torture couldn't achieve. This led to the development of family session protocols where relatives were tortured in specific sequences to maximize psychological impact. He also pioneered the use of hope as a torture tool, allowing victims to believe escape was possible before revealing it was another experiment. One journal entry describes maintaining this deception with a single victim for 3 months, documenting how hope affected physical resilience and recovery rates. The medical knowledge gained from these atrocities spread throughout the Roman world, though its origins were carefully hidden. Surgical techniques developed in the Colosseum's chambers advanced Roman medicine by centuries but at an unconscionable cost. Methods for controlling bleeding, treating shock, and managing pain all originated from arena experiments. The Romans developed anesthetics not to ease suffering but to control it, ensuring victims remained conscious at precisely the right moments. They understood infection control through experiments that deliberately induced and treated various diseases in prisoners. Most disturbingly, this knowledge was preserved and transmitted through medical schools for centuries after the arena closed. Medieval and Renaissance physicians unknowingly used techniques pioneered through torture, believing they were studying classical medicine. When modern researchers traced certain surgical procedures to their origins, they found references to techniques perfected in the amphitheater, a euphemism for discoveries made through systematic human experimentation. Galerius died peacefully in his bed at age 73, honored as one of Rome's greatest physicians. His statue stood in the medical college until 1944, when Allied bombing destroyed it. But his true legacy lives on in medical knowledge built on a foundation of unimaginable suffering, advances that saved countless lives but originated in humanity's darkest chambers.